I'm so sorry, but I am unable to notarize for your loved one today because after asking a series of questions, unfortunately, they cannot answer those questions. So I've determined that I am unable to notarize for them today. Unfortunately, I've had to say these very words far too often in the last couple of weeks. Why did I refuse to notarize for a client? Well, simply put, because I determined that they had limited mental capacity. When I ask those series of questions that we've talked about on this channel before, when I ask those questions and the client can either answer a few and doesn't know how to answer the rest of them, I have to determine whether or not they fully understand what they are signing. Now, unfortunately, I've had to do this as recently as last week. A young man called about his grandparent who was in the hospital. I met the grandson there. I then met the grandparent and I asked all of these questions. And I had to determine that the grandparent was not fully capable of understanding why I was there or even what he was signing. That is super important for me to determine. I have to protect my client, and my client is the person who is relinquishing power to give it to someone else. Of course, when I make these appointments, I ask the family to remove themselves from the room if they're not already outside of the room where the client is. Now, there's a reason for that. We've talked about that here, but I'll mention it for the new subscribers to this channel. When I ask for the family or friends to leave the room, I do that so that there is no pressure felt by my client, the person who's signing. See, even a person's presence in the room can make that person feel pressured to sign. But what if they don't understand what they're signing, or what if the family member says, "Oh, go ahead and sign it. Remember, we talked about this." And of course, the family member doesn't think that they're doing anything wrong. Their motives may be pure. However, as the notary public, as a public servant, I have to ensure that my client knows what he's signing and is fully willing to sign that paper. So I ask the family members to step out of the room. I ask those series of questions, and then if the client, of course, can answer those questions, then I notarize for them. However, if they cannot answer the questions, then I have to go back to the family and explain that I cannot notarize for your loved one today. Do I feel badly? Yes, I do. However, I have to protect my client. Again, there can be no coercion allowed, even if it's perceived coercion from the family members. So at that point, I end the appointment. Now, on the other end was a really interesting experience I had last week, where my client was fully competent. I had talked to him a few times over the phone and determined even just by our phone calls that he was fully aware of what he wanted to do. So we made the appointment. I met him, such a pleasant young man. The problem came in where he had a friend on the phone and who was on speaker, and the friend said, and I could hear the friend very clearly, "Sign the paper." At that point, I had to end that phone call quite kindly and tactfully because I did not want my client to feel coerced into signing anything he didn't want to sign. Now, he was already willing to sign. He already had what he wanted, what he needed. He had the document. He was willing to sign it. He was the one who called me. Whereas normally it's a family member or a friend who's calling me on behalf of the person who is in the care facility. But in this case, the client that was in the care facility is the one who called me. So he was fully aware of what he wanted to accomplish. But like I said, the person on the phone, his friend, made a demand that he sign the paper, and I wasn't going to have that. Again, I'm going to stand for my client every single time. And in the state of Ohio, there are notary laws that are very strict about refusing to notarize for a person. So I have to be very careful about who I refuse to notarize for. So yeah, I'm going to ask those questions. I'm going to ask those questions. I'm going to make a determination, and then I'm going to make a decision. And that decision will be shared with the family or friends. I am Carla Stewart, owner of Superior Signature Notary Service. I wanted to explain today why there is such a thing as a refusal to notarize. I feel it's an important subject to tackle, whether you are an aspiring notary public, whether you are not, and you are simply someone who wants to understand why a notary public would refuse to notarize your signature or the signature of your loved ones on any document. Thank you for watching today. Please subscribe to this channel for all things notary related. Have a great day.